Today's presenter is Andy Norman. Andy's a public philosopher and award-winning author. He's currently developing the conceptual foundations of cognitive immunology, the emerging science of mental immune health. He thinks his fledgling science explains how ideologies short-circuit minds and corrupt moral understanding. He also thinks applications can inoculate us against infectious forms of irrationality. Additionally, his book Mental Immunity is available for pre-order. So with that, go ahead and turn it over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Alexis. Can you all hear me? All right. Well, thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Abhishek, and thank you all. This is an unexpected pleasure. It's always nice to connect with kindred spirits and fellow free thinkers. So what I'd like to do today, and I understand I should limit myself to 20 or 25 minutes, I'd like to share a handful of ideas that I think have the potential to change the world. And then these are ideas from the book that Alexis mentioned, and then invite you to discuss and engage with them. And if you like them, then to go on and share them so that they can change the world at scale. Sound okay? Fair enough. All right. So I'll give you a quick overview of this handful of ideas, and then I'll come back around a second time and discuss each one in a little more detail. So claim number one is that mind parasites are real and ubiquitous. Claim number two, mental immune systems exist and function more or less well. When they don't function well, we end up susceptible to these mind parasites. Third, that the solution to this crazy post-truth predicament we find ourselves in is to understand how our minds, how mental immune systems work, and learn how to boost their performance. So my claim is that there's a new science emerging called cognitive immunology that's going to teach us how to dramatically improve our resistance to bad ideas. In fact, the early results and findings of this fledgling field suggest that there is a whole lot more to mental immune health than having critical thinking skills. So it turns out that having critical thinking skills is nowhere near enough to make yourself immune to really bad ideas. And finally, another really interesting consequence of the research I've done is that we all need to up our game, and that the garden variety bad ideas that escape our notice, even the best educated, best intentioned people among us, need to become more aware of the way bad ideas sneak past our mind's defenses. Because a lot of times garden variety bad ideas pave the way later for hugely destructive epidemics of unhinged thinking. Okay, so those are the ideas I want to talk about today. And let me start with the first and what may be the most controversial. My claim is that mind parasites really do exist and that they're ubiquitous. And the reason for this is actually quite simple. Bad ideas are in fact mind parasites, not analogous to mind parasites, but actual mind parasites. Think about it. Bad ideas are, first of all, they require a host. Bad ideas don't float around in the air. They need a host to exist. Bad ideas can replicate both through social networks and online. A bad idea can induce a person to spread it, just as the influenza virus can induce you to sneeze and thereby spread it. And bad ideas are harmful to their hosts almost by definition. And if you add all of these things up, it becomes pretty clear that it makes 100% good sense to talk about mind parasites. And furthermore, that all kinds of bad ideas, which is to say mind parasites, exist, and that in fact our minds are, no one of us is free from infection by many, many, many mind parasites. It's kind of a creepy thought, perhaps, but once you get used to it, it's actually extremely empowering. Okay, my second really big claim is that minds have immune systems. So to make that claim plausible and to show you that it's true, I have to define my terms. A mental immune system is the mind's infrastructure for warding off bad ideas. So the closest traditional concept that we have for talking about this is critical thinking. We think of critical thinking as kind of the screens or the filters that keep bad ideas out or help us remove them once they get installed. But it turns out that the what I call the critical thinking paradigm in higher education. By the way, the concept of critical thinking has now been around for a century. And in all that time, higher education has failed to impart anything close to herd immunity to bad ideas. We've seen crazy ideologies proliferate in Nazi Germany, in Bolshevik Russia, in Trumpian America. And it turns out that we're not very good at preventing irrational ideas from spreading, and that we actually need a new science of mental immunity to understand better how we can combat these epidemics of unhinged thinking. I like to think of myself as one of the founders of this field of cognitive immunology. I coined the term, and it's not a term that has gained much currency yet because I came to that term in the course of writing the book that will only appear a few months from now. But here you're getting a little preview of that idea. So cognitive immunology is the study of how mental immune systems work, why they, what kind of antibodies they employ to ward off bad ideas, why mental immune systems fail, what sorts of things weaken them and what sorts of things strengthen them. And it has a practical or applied branch, which which you might call cognitive immunotherapy, or the science of mental immune health should actually be producing what I call cognitive immunotherapies, which is to say instructional interventions that actually strengthen our resistance to bad ideas and prevent mental immune system collapse. So quick backstory on how am I doing on time, Alexis? Doing okay?
Yeah, you're doing good.
Maybe another 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes?
At least 10 minutes, yeah.
Here's a little backstory on cognitive immunology. In 1961, a guy named McGuire founded something he called Inoculation Theory. And basically, he tried to figure out how you could inoculate minds against things like North Korean brainwashing. And it turned out that he and his colleagues were able to amass an enormous amount of evidence that minds behave as if they have immune systems. But decade after decade after decade went by without anybody drawing what now seems to me to be the obvious conclusion, namely that mental immune systems aren't just a clever analogy, but they really do exist. And it's high time we started taking that language and the truths it discloses seriously. In the last decade or so, a new breed of inoculation theorists have begun applying inoculation theory to to various kinds of bad ideas. So notably, a guy named Sander van der Linden has been doing research, empirical research, on how you can inoculate minds against disinformation. So he's actually applying some of the findings of inoculation theory to this new reality we find ourselves in. And he's started to adopt what a philosopher would call a normative or non-value neutral concept of the kinds of things we should be inoculating minds against. So he calls some of his techniques pre-bunking. So it's relatively hard to debunk, say, a QAnon theorist after they've been deeply immersed in that. But it's relatively easy to pre-bunk somebody against QAnon adherents if you expose them to the right kinds of instruction beforehand. And so I like to think that in my book, I sort of take this concept of pre-bunking, this concept of mind inoculation, and develop it for the most general case of bad ideas generally. So it's not just disinformation. It's not just lies. It's not just alternative facts that we have to inoculate against. We also have to inoculate against bad value judgments. And it turns out that that's even the key to the problem, because if you study the way minds come unhinged, here's what happens. People get emotionally attached to value claims, and that emotional attachment causes them to begin dismissing facts and leads to a reality-resistant mindset. So lots of commentators now are calling for a return to shared facts, but it turns out that's not enough. We need to spread the idea that that it's important that we collectively defer to facts and good evidence, but we also need to hold ourselves accountable for responsible, moral, and ethical and political judgments. So in my book, I identify some prevailing ideologies that basically short circuit critical thinking when it comes to ethical and political beliefs. There are all kinds of what I call immune disruptive ideas at large in the meme pool that basically excuse unaccountable and irresponsible thinking about right and wrong. And we all need to do a better job of removing those immune disruptive ideas from the meme pool if we hope to prevent the kind of epidemics of craziness that we've seen in recent years, to keep them from recurring again and again in the internet age. I'll give you one example of an immune disruptive idea, which might resonate with you, being secular for the most part. I actually think that the idea that faith is a virtue sows the seeds of more extensive cognitive dysfunction. It essentially functions as an excuse why you don't have to abide by ordinary standards of evidence and reason. And when a concept like faith is a virtue gains currency, you begin the way it did, say, in the 1980s, when the religious right and the moral majority kind of launched the culture war. When that kind of thing happens, thinking begins to go haywire. And when thinking goes haywire and nothing is done about it at the root cause level for several decades, it's now 4 decades since the religious right launched the culture war, a culture's immune system can become deeply compromised. And that's what we're seeing play out today. I think I've said enough. I'd really like to hear what you guys think. And I know that Alexis probably has instructions for how exactly we might approach this, but I'm eager to hear what you guys can do with these ideas.
Yeah, it looks like we've already got at least one question in the chat. But what we're going to do before we go to Q&A, we tend to go to breakout rooms. This gives people a chance to socialize, get to talk to one another, and also come up with some questions. It also gives those on Facebook Live and YouTube a chance to get their questions in so we can ask them when we come back from the break. So with that, we're going to do about 5-10 minute breakout session, and then come back for some Q&A after that.
Perfect.
All right. And you can hit join, or you can hit later if you want to step away, get some coffee. No one has to go to the breakout room. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, like I said, this is a great chance to get your questions in the chat, and we can come back in a little bit and get those to Andy after the break.
Yeah, we're out. I think I wasn't giving much feedback.
You're fine.
Well, what do you think about the YouTube streaming? Do
you want to leave it on, or?
Well, I could just leave it on. I think my computer will just keep going. You can shut it off on your end, right?
Yeah, but.
Oh, well, I'd have to be here to unmute and turn back on.
Wait till then. I would say shut it off if you want.
Okay. This is earlier than I need to go, but it wouldn't hurt for me to get a slightly early start. So.
No, that's fine. Just shut it off.
All right, I'll go ahead and stop. And.
All right, thanks. Yeah, this was the main part of the talk anyway.
Okay. All right. I'll see you guys around.
All right. See you.
Bye, Kevin.
Bye.
I'll put the recording on.
Okay. I don't know what's going on with my computer right now.
So you have the breakout rooms going, right?
Yeah.
Has it already been 4 minutes?
No, it's just been 2 minutes. It was like right at 11. I thought.
Oh, I think I had a timer on it. It's gonna end in 4 minutes.
Oh, that's okay. I think people like this topic, so.
Yeah.
Because I'm.
Yeah, they should be able to come back in 5 minutes or so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just message everyone saying. Do we have any questions on Facebook? Okay. Not yet. Oh, actually, I can keep it going if I like, I think. That's what it does. It lets me keep it going.
Oh, okay.
And we can extend it another 5 minutes. That way nobody has to get out to listen. I had it from last time.
I mean, this is a very interesting topic.
Yes, we should have lots of questions. I think, I mean, because he just introduced the topic, looks like.
Right.
So.
I'm going to have to buy his book.
Yeah. I actually, I don't know if you saw in Syed released his book.
Oh yeah, I did.
I had a Kindle unlimited trial on my Kindle, on my Kindle app through Amazon. I don't know. You can probably sign up too. It's just a trial version. You can sign up for 1 month.
Yeah.
And that was giving it basically the book.
Nice.
I mean, I think it'll still pay him basically.
Yeah, like he still gets like a portion or something.
Yeah. So we can. I read the book. Actually, it was a very short read. It's like 100 pages or something. It's basically some of the stuff that he's talked over the years and all that, all the stuff about going to Indian concerts versus going to an American concert and all that, and going to Indian weddings or Pakistani weddings, and going to the very organized American weddings. Yeah, the Indian weddings are a lot more freer. You don't have to sit in one place.
Yeah. Yeah,
Pretty
like
much never.
I went to a friend's, she was Catholic, and her husband is Sikh. He's
Right. Yeah.
and so like they did a wedding at the Sikh temple first, and that was interesting.
Well, that one, if you do it at a Sikh temple, it's a little more organized.
Yeah,
People have
like
to sit in one place.
yeah, all the women had to sit on one side, and all the men had to sit on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. Those you have all those. Well, in Hindu temples, it's not like that. You don't have to segregate. But because usually families sit together in Indian temples and all that. But the difference is the main difference in if you do it at home or in a function hall kind of thing, I guess a wedding venue, is that people don't really hang out to see the wedding.
Oh.
Yeah.
You kind of just do the wedding and
yeah, basically people go to eat food and sometimes hang out to see what the wedding is going on.
Interesting.
Yeah, because at least in my family, weddings are like through the night.
Yeah.
So they're like, they start at like, so the groom comes at around 9 p.m. or something, or maybe later, 10 p.m., 11 p.m. And then it goes through 3 or 4 a.m. And then they go back home at 6 a.m. because there's some interlude time. They're trying to pass time until the morning, essentially, so that they can go in the morning. So they leave at like 7 a.m. in the morning. So, I mean, people just eat and be merry.
I mean, it's supposed to be a celebration.
Mm-hmm. But I made it open up, I guess. Let's wait till 11:10. There we go. Did you get a message on the Zoom?
Yes.
Okay. And the whole sentence came through?
And the what?
And the whole sentence came through?
Yes.
Okay. Sometimes, I think Jesse told me once that if you write a long message, it cuts off.
I'm ordering Girl Scout cookies right now.
Oh, yeah. Who are you ordering from? All the 3 or 4 people who posted on your thing?
Yeah.
They're like $5 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're getting expensive.
But 3 of them live relatively close by. So, like, I think the furthest one away was like Highway 10 and Highway 6,
Mm-hmm.
like that area. So I was kind of like, you can drive for cookie.
Well, do they drive to you or you drive?
They drive to us, yeah.
Okay. I thought you drive to them and they're doing a drive-through.
I was like, they can drop them off. Like, that's not too far of a drive.
You said Highway 6 and I-10?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's like the next exit compared to for Houston.
One person was I-45 and 99, on the north side.
Mm-hmm.
But you can order them. You can do direct delivery, so you just order from the yeah.
ABC.
Yeah, which is good because apparently one of the cookies that Gosha wanted isn't available locally, but they have it at the.
Which one is that? The new one?
No, well, it's the caramel cookie one.
Oh, I like that one. Yeah.
So like or the caramel chocolate chip.
Oh, okay, that the other one, not the coconut one, right? The
No,
one that looks like coconut.
That one's available locally. But so the one that was on closer to 45, I just did a direct ship so we could get those.
I usually like Thin Mints because it sort of reminds me of another cookie that's like a Nestle. It's called After Eight. I don't know if you've tried it before.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it reminds me of that sort of the taste at least.
Nice.
But After Eight is just pure. There's no cookie inside. It's just chocolate and mint inside, mint liquid inside.
Ooh.
Yeah, that one's really good.
Nice.
But it's very hard to get and it's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
It's like a small box for $6 and the big box of it is $14 sometimes. Yeah, I used to buy it at duty frees when I used to go to India and stuff.
I think
but now I think HEB has it.
I think World Market has it, but I don't know what the price is.
Yeah, it's gotten cheaper, I think, a little bit in some ways, but because that one's always crazy. All right, so should I close the room?
Yeah, let's go ahead and bring him back.
Okay.
Just dying, no big deal.
We'll start in about a minute or so. Three seconds. All right, everyone should be coming back. Welcome back, everyone. We will be starting shortly. In 10.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully everyone had like some good discussions. We're going to start Q&A. We do have a couple in the chats already, but if you have one that you want to ask Andy yourself, feel free to raise your hand, do a little reaction icon so we can see your box, and we can unmute y'all so you can ask them directly. First question we have from Facebook. One from Raul. Some personalities, I've read that some personalities are more susceptible to misinformation. Do you theorize they have a weak mental immune system, and what can strengthen it?
Oh, wow. Am I unmuted? Okay,
Yeah.
You can hear me? Wow, lovely question. So there's some really interesting research done in psychology between what are called the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. So people with a fixed mindset, when they fail at something, they say, oh, I'm no good at this. And then they tend not to grow towards excellence in that domain. But people with a growth mindset experience setbacks and say, oh, well, I guess I got something to learn. Maybe I can do a little bit better next time. And then they try again. And it turns out that people who have the growth mindset are more successful in terms of living happy lives in terms of thriving on almost every measure. It's almost like a master skill. If you can learn to approach everything with a growth mindset, you can transform your life. Now, there was some thinking that growth mentality and fixed mentality were to some degree hardwired, that people differ in that respect in ways they couldn't control. But it's now emerging that you can actually learn to become more growth-minded, both more growth set-minded. And I actually think that the fixed mind, on my analysis, the fixed mindset is actually a mental immune disorder. It prevents the mind from functioning properly to learn and grow. So where existing psychologists think of growth mindset and fixed mindset, they try to be even-handed and treat them as, but they end up indulging a kind of false equivalence, saying, well, being open-minded is one way to be, but being closed-minded, well, that's a perfectly valid way to be too. No, they aren't that explicit typically, but an unwillingness to judge the closed mindset as problematic has persisted for a long time in psychology. If my book is successful, I think it'll help to convince psychologists that there's a moral imperative to help people move away from the fixed mindset, because the fixed mindset doesn't just screw up the lives of the people who hold that mindset. It also tends to harm the people they interact with.
All right. Next question. What's the overlap or difference between a bad or harmful meme and a mind parasite?
Yeah. Oh boy, wow. That's a deep philosophical question. To whom do I owe such a tough question? Nicely done. So I guess I would want to say that every bad idea is a mind parasite, but there are other kinds of mind parasites as well. By the way, I'm still trying to think my way through on this, so you can tell me if you see an error in this, please help me understand. But I'd be willing to say that every bad idea is, on my definition, a mind parasite. And by the way, different things can make an idea bad. So falsehood is a bad making quality, an idea, and counts against the goodness. The falsehood of an idea counts against it. The being poorly evidenced is another bad making quality that an idea can either have or lack. Being harmful, say by being dispiriting, that's also a bad quality in an idea. And I think a fully open-minded person is attuned not just to the, say, upstream evidence that a belief is true, but also to the downstream consequences or effects of believing that idea. So when religious people say, the idea that God loves me inspires me, fills me with hope, they're pointing to a downstream consequence of an idea that I would argue is fictitious. But the downstream benefits, the psychological and even social benefits of believing that God loves you can be very real. And they count towards the goodness of the idea that God loves me. Now, there are other things that count against that idea. And I think a fully adequate analysis will take a look at those as well. But one thing we in the science community have failed to recognize is that it's not just upstream evidence that matters. The downstream consequences of ideas and beliefs also matter. And it's high time we developed a method of assessing beliefs that take both into consideration, not just the one. When, in fact, you can, I think a lot of religious reactionary right-wing religious attitudes are often rooted in a fear that if we only pay attention to upstream evidence and fail to and neglect the downstream consequences of ideas, that we will lose something terribly important. And you know what? They're right about that. Upstream evidence matters, but downstream consequences matter also. And the sciencey-minded folks among us who say, pay attention to the upstream evidence, have a very important piece of the truth. But the religious folks among us who say, wait a second, you know, if we toss out these ideas, I'm going to lose all hope. If we toss out these ideas, how will I trust again? They're pointing to a relevant consideration as well. And until we build a way of thinking and talking about ideas that takes both into account, we're not going to successfully adjudicate the longstanding dispute between liberal science activists on the one hand and reactionary religious folks on the other.
Okay, and I think Richard asked that question, so feel free to follow up on that, Richard, if you want some more clarification. Johnny, you have your hand up for a question. We'll go to you.
Oh, sure. I want to thank Andy very much for the talk. Our group had a very lively discussion. We wish we could, discuss it for a long, long time. A couple of concepts that came up in our discussion group, we wanted to ask you about the role of indoctrination. And then particularly, we very much want your book to be successful, so we're looking forward to it. How do you convince the science community that this is a science? And how do you science this? And then how can we test and utilize the scientific method to show that these concepts are real, and that maybe we can test ourselves to see how is our thinking either kind of rational or the areas in which it's irrational? Hoping you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So brainwashing, and then how to convince scientists to invest in this new science. Yeah, great questions. I don't know that I have any particular expertise on brainwashing, except insofar as I think brainwashing is a very deliberate way of hacking minds. And the thing that's emerging from this new science is that ideas themselves can hack minds without any human, without any deliberate demagogic propagandist or brainwasher at the helm. Does that make sense? So ideas have properties that allow them to hotwire brains, even when there's no mastermind behind their spread. So think of the way in which a salacious rumor can spread despite not having any grounds in fact. Because salacious rumors of who's sleeping with who are sexy, they're riveting. We're tempted to pass them along, often without checking to see that they're true. So ideas have properties that allow them to induce minds to spread them. And propaganda and brainwashing are more sinister, deliberate attempts to use mind hacking techniques to win political power, to make money, or to pursue other ends. So I'll stop there on brainwashing, because the other question I think really interests me. I want to say more about that. How do you get scientists to take the idea of mental immune systems seriously? So I shopped this book manuscript to many book editors who do science books, and many of them responded, oh, that's just a metaphor. So I went back into my manuscript and I worked for about 6 or 8 months polishing the chapters that basically demonstrate to scientists how metaphors actually become literal through widespread acceptance. So we have this this preconception that a metaphor can sort of gesture vaguely in the direction of a new phenomenon, But until we actually look for that phenomenon and find actual chunks of matter that constitute that phenomenon, then it's not really a discovery, it's just a metaphor. Turns out all kinds of respectable scientific concepts started off as metaphors, gained currency because they were useful, and now refer to phenomena that aren't spatially located chunks of matter. So think about the fact of bodily immunity. The body's immune system is a hugely distributed thing. It's not it's not a distinct chunk of matter that you can separate from the rest of the body. Think about the concept of a meme. So Richard Dawkins coined the term back in, I think, 1976 in his book, The Selfish Gene. And everybody said, oh, the memes, yeah, that's just an analogy with genes. It's just a metaphor. But then the idea caught on and became extremely useful for understanding how things sweep across the internet. And we now talk about viral ideas, viral memes, as though they were real, because we see those phenomena play out in real time. So the concept of a meme is now being taken seriously by scientists, not because anybody discovered a discrete chunk of matter called a meme, but because the concept meme proved useful. If I can show that the concept of a mental immune system is useful, scientists will come around too. Many of, I should say, there are a few dozen scientists who are already saying, you know what, this idea of mind parasite and this other idea of mental immune system, we need to take this seriously. So scientists are coming on board already, but it takes time to turn an institution the size of science around. And so it'll take many people, many of them non-scientists, non-specialists, saying, hey, this idea is useful and I can apply it to my life. And if need be, we'll drag the scientists along by showing them how useful the idea is.
All right. Next question is from Bob. What is your take on whether most human decision-making is logically based and emotionally influenced, or emotionally based and logically influenced?
Okay. Neat. So I think there's something going on in that question that question sounds more subtle than I'm not sure I appreciate its full subtlety. I do think that, I mean, there's tons of evidence that human decision-making is hugely influenced by emotion. However, many psychologists have concluded, and so going all the way back to David Hume, the Scottish philosopher in the 1800s, Hume basically said, we believe based on emotion, and reason and logic have absolutely nothing to do with it. Hume overstated his case. And many psychologists today are overstating their case by saying, we're just deeply irrational creatures and that's it, so get used to it and forget trying to change us along that line. Now, this argument is really a really bad argument for the following reason. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Yes, if you look closely at human thinking, it's riddled with biases and other irrational features. But that doesn't mean we can't become comparatively rational, that we can't become incrementally more rational. And it turns out even small steps in the direction of becoming more rational can have huge impact on the well-being of humanity. So think of the Enlightenment. Inside of the single century in which David Hume lived, a huge emphasis on reason swept through Europe. People became disillusioned by faith, and various kinds of violence and killing decreased by orders of magnitude. There's Steven Pinker has documented over a dozen different kinds of violence that decreased by about an order of magnitude, precisely because Europeans started taking the concept of reason seriously and realizing, hey, you know what? Maybe we can't be perfectly rational. That doesn't mean we can't become better at being reasonable. So we have to tell we can't let the psychologists just emphasize innate irrationality to the point where they overlook the nurture component that allows us to make meaningful progress towards being comparatively rational. I'm not sure that answer did justice to the question, because there was a subtlety in the question. Was it Bob or something? If you'd care to.
He's giving you thumbs up, so.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
All right, the next question is from Lou. How do you know who to pre-bunk?
Yeah, so I mean, ideally, education would inoculate all of us against the worst forms of irrational contagion. So you can take a particular idea, say that climate change is a hoax, and try to debunk that idea. And it turns out that's a hard row to hoe if somebody is become a serious science denier. But if you take kids or even adults aside and use some of these pre-bunking techniques or mind inoculation techniques, you can actually make them far more accepting of the idea that global warming is real, and the effects can last for months. So we now have hard empirical evidence that you can take particular issues, use inoculation techniques, and really change minds. Whereas even a couple years ago, the prevailing wisdom was that you really can't change people's minds if they're emotionally invested in an issue. But we're learning now, and the science is showing us, there are in fact ways to talk to science deniers that work. Now, pre-bunking or debunking on particular issues is a very piecemeal way to go about combating irrationality. What I'm talking about in my book is a more wholesale approach where we strengthen mental immune systems across the board so that each and every child that grows up in our world is comparatively good at spotting bad ideas and warding them off. So I've actually, if you're interested in reading about this book, you'll actually learn that I'm developing a mind vaccine that I think can go a long way towards helping future generations develop this kind of broad immunity.
Awesome. And then we still have a few more questions, but we're running short on time, so this is going to be the last question. And feel free, some of us stay after to kind of just talk here in the Zoom session for a free-for-all, so you're welcome to stick around if you want to do that.
I'd like that.
But the last question I feel kind of ties in with this last question is from Eric. How does one determine when inoculation strays into manipulation?
Wow, that's a lovely question.
We're sending you some hard hitters today.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, way to go, guys. That's the first time I've heard that question posed so directly. So I'm gonna try to muddle my way through an answer here. So actually there was an interesting story a couple of months ago about the Chinese, you know how the Chinese have detention camps for the Uyghur groups in China. They're actually using the concept of mind inoculation to try to cure these Uyghurs of their Islamic faith. And it involves a very coercive kind of detention and re-education that is clearly morally problematic. So here's an example of a somewhat authoritarian regime employing what looks like an inoculation strategy against views that they regard as harmful in ways that I think should bother all of us. And there's a danger, of course, that oligarchs, authoritarians will seize on this mental immunity language and, start force inoculating us against, I don't know, humanistic ideas, right? I mean, there's clearly a danger there, and we need to be aware of it. I mean, the long answer is that it's terribly important that we learn to screen out the right kinds of ideas and how to let in we need to learn to let in the good ideas and screen out the bad ones. And when people develop ways of screening out good ones and letting in bad ones, that becomes really worrisome. So part of the program of cognitive immunology involves trying to create a solid conceptual foundation so that these tools are not misused in this way.
All right. Thank you so much. This is an amazingly fascinating topic.
Oh, hey, could I show Alexis before people go? Guys, I just wanted to, if you are interested in the book, I'd like to show you an image.
Absolutely.
Where you can.
We can see it there.
Okay, good. So the book will be out in May. You can actually pre-order it now at any of your favorite booksellers, certainly the online ones. And if you're interested in being part of this whole cognitive immunology revolution that I'm fomenting, what you can do is point Facebook to my author page, and you'll get some of my posts and some of my ideas about how you can actually help strengthen mental immune systems, that we can come along for the ride and help make it happen. So I invite you to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Hope everyone is well.
Yeah.
What I was just thinking about, and we discussed this in our breakout room a little bit, is like with so many things, it seems to me that this, like, and that was a great example with the Chinese government, is who ultimately decides what is the good idea and what is the bad idea. Because what I was thinking is that, like, you know, and we see this tendency elsewhere, is that, you know, at a certain period of time, there might have been people on the left that would have said, Marxism is fact. There's going to be a revolution, you know, that his theories of this show that this is the way history is going to go. And so you need to accept this. Like, that is the objective reality. Well, we found that that's not the objective reality, right? But that's what was being preached as being the scientific, you know, understanding back in the day. And so I guess I'm just, you know, like, all of that, I love everything what you're saying, but as with anything, it always makes me a little scared about an authoritarian, like you're saying, going and promoting his ideas as the right ideas. So how do we determine, you know, who's the arbiter of this, I guess?
That's a lovely question, Josh. So there's so much to say on that subject. So yes, it's certainly, I think all of us worry that powerful people willing to use coercive techniques will decide that they have the truth, and everybody else needs to be browbeaten into accepting or believing what they think, or being brainwashed. Now that's a clear danger. But the danger we face today is very much that the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction. Here's what I worry about. So many people, so the short answer to the question, who's to say, is the answer is we're to say. Who, because there's no God that's going to come in and decide the question for us. Which ideas are good, which ideas aren't good, it's up to us to say. And I can tell you this, the question, who's to say, functions primarily as a mental immune disruptor. It actually it gets people off the hook from taking on difficult moral questions. If you teach philosophy the way I do, and you try to get people interested in right and wrong and how to think clearly about right and wrong, one of the first questions you get is, well, who's to say what's right and what's wrong? This is the reflex reaction of people who are uncomfortable, who are made uncomfortable with the task of making hard judgments about right and wrong. And what's happened in our culture is that the excuse, well, who's to say, has become so widespread that the best lack all conviction. And we do too little to, so it's when the best lack all conviction that the worst are filled with passionate intensity, right? So we actually need to teach ourselves and each other that each and every one of us should have a voice in deciding which ideas are worth preserving and which ideas should be cast out. I believe in a highly distributed system where many people collaborate to and dialogue, converse together to decide which ideas are right and what's wrong. And one of the big lessons from philosophy is that the best way to weed out bad ideas is to dialogue, is to have conversation about them. And you have to give the voices of those who favor what would appear to be bad ideas a voice. You need to hear them out. But that doesn't mean we have to give them the biggest soapboxes in the room. Doesn't mean we should allow the Donald Trumps of the world to broadcast their bile over huge social media networks. So the short answer to your question, Josh, is a great one, which is that the first thing we need to do is honestly confront the fact that it's up to us to weed out the bad ideas. It's weird to say. And then we have to figure out a suitably democratic and participatory way of doing that that is non-coercive. And reason-giving dialogue is the way to do that.
Many years ago, when my daughter was in college, she was encountered a rather stressful situation, and I wrote her several letters, and in one of them I suggested that she consider the other person's motives and perhaps ask the other person what they expected of her in that response. Were they considering her contentment and well-being, or their own selfish goals and objectives? Later, Sam Harris wrote a book about that. I didn't bother with writing the book, so Sam did, and he makes him smarter than me because I didn't know I had such a great idea at the time. But I think that's a core of human interaction. If you can ask yourself, are you doing that for my contentment and well-being? Are you serving your own selfish goals?
Beautiful. I love the question. You've actually touched on the subject of my next book, by the way. So there are selfish people out there who care about their own well-being and don't care at all about the well-being of others. And it's a really interesting question in philosophy, how you dialogue with people like that. And Steven Pinker, who's actually did the foreword to my book on mental immunity, he argues beautifully that if other people want you to recognize them as mattering, then you have to recognize them as, then they have to recognize you as mattering. I hope I said that right. I might have gotten it mixed up. But the idea here is that it's got to be reciprocal. If you want me to take your interests seriously, you got to take my interests seriously. If you want me to be persuaded by your reasons, you have to be open to the possibility that my reasons might change your mind as well. There are a whole lot of, say, religious apologetics that basically enters the dialogue saying, I'm going to use reasons to browbeat you into believing my Christian faith, but I don't have to listen to your reasons and change my mind if you have good reasons. There's a double standard there that subverts dialogue and robs it of its real potential.
I think you touched on the key question there, and it boils down to, are you willing to change your mind?
That's the key. I have a special name for that idea. Jim, is it Jim?
Jay.
I have a special, I give that idea a special name in my book. I call it Reasons Fulcrum. And the idea here is that if you're not willing to let good reasons on the other side change your mind, you're opting out of the most beneficial social contract humanity has ever invented. Reason doesn't work. Nonviolent conflict resolution doesn't work. Our institutions don't work if people don't defer to better reasons. That's the linchpin to turning around this whole thing, which is teach every child to respect and yield to better reasons. Because when that idea gets compromised, everything goes haywire. And that's why we're seeing the world we see today. Beautiful point, Jay. You put your finger right on the heart of the whole thing.
Eric has I think Eric has a question.
Well, not a question. There was a comment. There was a discussion about who decides which ideas are the right ones. I don't think it's who decides. I think it's what decides. I think the decider is time. There are always ideas that were off target, strayed, tangential during history, and they don't survive the test of time. Eventually, time settles the score.
That's actually a lovely point, and I'm gonna, if I may, I'm gonna borrow your point here because I think you've said it better than I did. It's not ultimately who decides. Authority should ultimately be pushed out beyond ourselves to the evidence that is objectively out there in the world. So time is an interesting answer. Yes, we need to give dialogue time to expose the deep and complex truth. Interesting and deep and complex truths always take time to unfold in dialogue. And so we do have to give it time, but we also just need to let objective facts and evidence determine what we should believe. So even though I say we are to decide, your answer is even better. What should decide? If it's all right, well, it's too late now for me to footnote you, but I would have it.
I keep waiting for the word experience to come in here somewhere, because that includes time, but it includes communal kind of experiences as well as my personal experiences, which I keep waiting for experiences to come in when we're talking about emotion. And anyway, my decisions change a lot depending upon what I have seen of life and my own experiences.
Susan, that's actually a lovely comment with a long and distinguished philosophical history. Philosophers who call themselves empiricists and John Dewey and the pragmatists, a lot of them argued that basically, ultimately, it's experience that should decide. So it's when our nervous systems interact with what is really out there that we end up with the basic evidence upon which we should build all responsible belief. I like that idea a lot. Insofar as we talk about experience rather than just the objective facts themselves, you open up the possibility that an idiosyncratic emotional response to reality would taint your evidence. But hey, all evidence is mediated by experience. So I think your point is an excellent one.
Marge has a question. I think you're muted.
Sorry.
There we go.
I put it in the chat as well. I'm involved in a chat group, and there's one member that's always saying, but you're making a moral judgment as a means of shutting up the other person. And I was thinking moral judgments are an important part of making social progress. It's the hard work of negotiating meaning and truth, or am I off base?
It sounds right. Sounds right to me. I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the lessons of our current age, well, sorry, let me back up a little bit. When the scientific revolution happened about 400 years ago, there was a big power struggle between the intelligentsia, the people of the Republic of Letters, and the church. And they worked out a division of labor. And basically they said, all right, scientists, you guys get to figure out the facts, but we religious authorities, we're going to tell you what values we should have. You do the facts, we'll do the values. And that division of labor has lasted for about 400 years, but it's really started to break down as the idea of evidence-based policy, evidence-based ethics has begun to take hold. I'm very much in the camp that says we need to make moral beliefs accountable as well. And they certainly need to be accountable to evidence, among other things, but they also need to be accountable to basic standards of decency and fairness. And I mean, right? I mean, it's not as though the facts alone will tell us what's right and what's wrong. It's only when nervous systems like ours interact with facts that things show up as good or bad, right or wrong. But we can't but we have to do the hard work of investigating those matters in a scientific spirit and working out what's right and what's wrong using the best reasons available.
I believe Benson has a question. He's from our Nairobi Oasis startup. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, Benson. Maybe there was a mistake. That's fine.
I'm saying this is super innovation. It's a very great move. But I'm wondering, mental parasite and mental immunity, how will your book help a community that believes gayism and lesbianism, it's a mental parasite that needs mental immunity?
I'm afraid my Zoom may have glitched there momentarily, Benson. Could you frame that again, please?
Yeah, I'm saying, how will your book help, scientifically speaking, how will your book solve this problem in a community that believes gayism and lesbianism, it's a mental parasite that needs a mental immunity?
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Nice question.
Yeah.
So I think a key move is to help religious people or people who are deeply enmeshed in a political ideology or any other kind of ideology, help them understand that the question, is that really a responsible belief? They need to take that question seriously. So of any given belief, it should be possible to ask, is that really a responsible belief? Should I really be holding it? And what we have in our world today are entire communities dedicated to clinging to certain beliefs and discouraging people from asking that question. But that question leads to moral growth. You have to ask yourself, is this belief really serving us well? And be willing to accept an answer that doesn't initially appeal to you if you want to grow beyond the bounds of a rigid religious ideology. So one of the things I do in my book, I have a whole chapter on the ethics of faith, where I trace a wonderful philosophical clash of philosophical titans who take opposite sides on the question of whether faith is a moral virtue or not. And I patiently show that even the most religious among us must accept the verdict of the argument that faith is morally troublesome. And that you can't just take certain things as basic or fundamental or just too dear to your heart to question. To do that is to be a fundamentally irresponsible human being. You need to be willing to ask of even your most cherished beliefs, is this really a good idea? And be willing to hear what other people have to say. And by the way, if you don't undergo that process and come to beliefs that can withstand questioning, you're denying yourself a solid moral foundation. You're denying yourself a worldview that is stable in the face of questioning. You wonder why so many religious people are highly insecure about their beliefs and why they react so emotionally when secularism starts asking questions. It's because they've built their identities on quicksand. But we can teach them how they can build stable moral conviction on facts, and thereby give them a kind of peace of mind that they're struggling to find. I hope that addresses the question.
Yeah, it helps. It helps.
Thanks. Anyone else has any question?
Looks like Joshua does.
Yeah, go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself. Yep.
Sorry, I don't mean to hog the question session here, but another thing that I was just thinking, what's your opinion on, you know, that there's the famous MLK quote that the arc of the moral universe or something bends towards goodness or righteousness or something like that. And so I lived in South Africa for several years in the past, and I've got I still have many good friends there, and also friends from Zimbabwe. And whenever whenever that quote is said to them, they're kind of like, well, that's just BS. Because they were like, you know, things in Zimbabwe seem to be going well, you know, post-independence for a while. And then with Mugabe, everything just like, you know, went down. And so I guess for me, whenever I hear that, it's a nice quote, but I don't really believe it. It seems that really like moral progress and all of this kind of stuff is dependent on how active, like you said, we as a community are in going and promoting it. And if there's not enough people actively going and getting involved in stuff, then no, it doesn't bend towards righteousness. So I would just wonder what your take on that would be.
I love it. This reminds me of a sign I saw at a Black Lives Matter rally not long ago. It basically said, the arc of the moral universe isn't going to bend itself. So I don't think it's written into the fabric of the cosmos that moral progress will happen. I agree with you on that score. But I do think that there's very strong empirical reasons for thinking that we have managed to make moral progress by and large. So the number of people in poverty has declined precipitously in recent decades. Slavery has been all but abolished where it used to be widespread. Women's rights have spread across the globe. Gay rights are increasingly recognized. These are all represent tangible forms of moral progress. And Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, I think it was, is just full of statistical data that says that things are getting better for human beings. Like almost every measure of human well-being is increasing in the big picture, but because we focus on headlines that highlight what's going wrong, we often fail to appreciate that or approach the world in a sufficiently hopeful and with a sufficiently positive frame of mind. So to your friends in Zimbabwe or whatever, I would say, yeah, there are certainly, in the moral progress, certainly there are setbacks, right? The line towards moral growth zigs and zags as it gradually winds its way up. And it really sucks to be in a part of the world where you seem to be regressing morally, but don't give up hope. If we all pitch in, we can get there.
I have a question about, we can learn these things. And as a society such and such, are there institutional impediments to helping this to happen or making it happen? And what are they?
Yeah. Wow. Boy, you're really making me think here. I love it. Yeah, I mean, there will certainly be resistance to these ideas from ideologues. I mean, QAnon theorists will not flock to cognitive immunology and begin to inoculate themselves. And anti-vaxxers will certainly be skeptical of my program to vaccinate their minds. But look, there's really very little. We have this huge public health infrastructure for inoculating bodies, and it's going to pull us out of this COVID thing. But we have no seriously well thought out or well designed public health infrastructure to deal with outbreaks of unreason. You'd think a good educational system would do that, but we need to redesign higher education, certainly, but probably elementary, middle, and high school as well, so that kids grow up with strong mental immune systems and the ability to think for themselves. So those are just some of the institutions that will have to come around, and where it'll take a lot of hard work to nudge things along. But I keep talking to people who say, you know, Andy, your book is just totally the right idea at the right time. Maybe it'll, hang onto your surfboard, the wave's coming. And I like to think this cognitive immunology revolution I alluded to with my tongue somewhat in cheek, it could really happen. If enough people see the sense in these ideas and begin to nudge their respective institutions to promote accountable talk and to discourage unaccountable talk, we could see a sea change in our culture that will exempt our children and our grandchildren from crazy outbreaks of nonsense.
I've actually got to head out. Andy, it was great having you, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Alexis. It's a
See
pleasure.
y'all later.
Also, I was thinking conversely, what about, is there a value to propaganda? Like, during the wars, they had these blatantly false things out there. Is that perpetuating myths? Like, it could have led to some amount of anti-Japanese sentiment, for example.
Yeah, wow, interesting. So I think propaganda is by definition manipulative. And and there are plenty of examples of history of propaganda being used to manipulate people into believing bad things. And so
even today.
Right, sure. Right. So Nazi propaganda or even neo-Nazi propaganda is bad for being manipulative, and it's also bad because the ideas it promotes are bad or harmful. But there are also examples from history of propaganda being used to on the side of the angels. So when the US government used propaganda to rally American public sentiment to fight back in World War II, arguably that was a better use of propaganda. So interesting case. I guess I would say that the only way to think clearly about cases like this is to acknowledge that insofar as it's manipulative, it's bad. But insofar as it's helping move people rapidly in a good direction, it can also has good making qualities. So that the truth here is complicated, right? There are good sides and bad sides to when you use propaganda for a good cause, it's a morally mixed thing because you're still manipulating when you should be persuading using more less coercive means.
Benson, do you have a question by chance?
No, I have asked already.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Did Chuck? Oh, John, go ahead.
Going from self-interest to social interest, I start with I hate being hungry myself, and so then I go to the value. It's a good thing that no one goes hungry as a good, and yet if society takes that and feeds everyone universally, then if I'm not hungry, I decide not to work and just lay around. So I'm wondering about a moral hazard where values may collide with, or does the question simply move to how do we feed the most people without the moral hazard of John and his peer group stop working and live off the work of others?
Right. So it's a nice question, and I think many people of a conservative bent worry that if people don't have the sort of the stick of economic destitution and hunger to motivate them, that they'll stop working. I think increasingly there's good evidence that we can use carrots alone and far fewer. We don't have to use the stick of economic destitution and hunger to motivate people to do good work. It can be harder to get people to do good work purely for the sake of, I don't know, to express their creativity or to promote a better world or to help others. but that doesn't mean it's impossible. So I think much conservative economic theory has been too quick to dismiss the possibility that maybe the governments should provide for people's basic economic needs and use other techniques to motivate productive behavior.
Yeah. Chuck, did you have a question by chance? Did I see your hand? No. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I mean, we've been, all political decisions, social decisions depend on accurate facts. That's what we've been talking about. Given the fact that science has known for at least 100 years the process necessary to get to factual, objective knowledge, you know, Karl Popper and everything. But science itself has not created a repository for factual knowledge. There isn't anywhere you can go to actually find out whether something is true or not. Wikipedia is the best we've got. What hope is there for factual political knowledge?
Yeah, I guess I would say that Wikipedia seems to me to be a marvelous accomplishment, and it's an example of it's a shining example of how we can amass facts and use them to educate ourselves and one another, so that our conversations and our moral decisions are better grounded. I mean, the problem right now is that Wikipedia has to compete with you know, right-wing spin machines and you know, Reddit threads that are just interested in kind of feeding people's sense of grievance, right? I'd love to see the internet redesigned to promote deliberation and rational dialogue, and have the corners of the internet that feed, you know, viral nonsense and irrational. I hope that there are clever ways to design online experiences that help to bring out the best in human nature and that stop bringing out the worst in us. I know it's possible in principle, but it'll be the work of the next couple generations, I think, to redesign the internet and the experiences we tend to create for each other on the internet in that way. And in fact, just to speak on that question, I was reading a New York Times article this morning about how there are online sites where you can go to denounce people and destroy their reputations if they do unethical things, but other people use them just to destroy reputations, even if you haven't done anything wrong. So these are places where unaccountable talk flourishes. And some of the lawyers who are starting to investigate this phenomenon and bring lawsuits are pointing out that these sites are not well designed to either to bring out truths, to bring about fairness, to bring about any of the things that should really matter. And that the main reason they don't is that they put it this way: a completely unregulated marketplace of ideas doesn't function any better than a completely unregulated economic marketplace. Just as we need to design economies to serve us all well, we need to design the marketplace of ideas so that reason and dialogue help to filter out bad ideas.
That was a great answer. Anyone else has questions, or you want to talk about something? Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
So one thing that I've just been wondering that I wanted to kind of pair, because I was also wondering about Abhishek's question about, like, you know, you talk about the good lie, and it made me think about like Dr. Fauci, in which, from what I understand, he seems to have provided some misinformation at certain points in order to make sure that PPE was not hoarded and could get to the medical workers, and also even something as far as the herd immunity level. It seems like he said, well, I actually think it's 80%, but I didn't think people were ready to hear that previously. And so I said this. And so I guess to try to go and take all of this theoretical and put it into like an actual practical thing, one, do you think there is such a thing as a good lie? Like in that case, was that justified? And secondly, as we're confronting the pandemic, when I talk with my anti-vaxxer friends and stuff, we know that we have to get a decent number of people vaccinated in order for this thing to end. What's the approach that I take? You know, okay, it's too late to pre-bunk, right? Now I have to debunk, but I don't know what the best way to go about that is. Using your tools and tactics, what's the approach?
Wow, boy, lots of interesting things to think about there. So the idea of a noble lie or a good lie goes all the way back to Plato, and it certainly seems to me, I mean, the concept makes perfect sense to me. I think there are, I mean, for example, when you raise a small child and you know that they can't comprehend the full and complex truth, you'll often just simplify for them. And you might even simplify it in a way that technically isn't true, but you know you need to do that to scaffold their understanding. That seems to me something good teachers do all the time. So it's not as though, and Fauci, your example of Fauci is a really nice one. I think part of so yes, there may have been some actual deception or involved in his talk about PPE to make sure that healthcare workers got it. You can understand. So here's a man, Fauci, who both has a commitment to the truth and also a commitment to public welfare. And his commitment to truth was pulling him one direction, and his commitment to public welfare was pulling him another direction. And he ended up saying something that could be faulted on one of those two dimensions. I think so ideally, we say things that are both true and useful. And we avoid things that are only the one but not the other. Or I don't mean that in a full generality, but you get the idea. But there got to be situations like Abhishek's where you have to cut corners on the one to serve the larger good. So I don't have any simple answers on this, except to say that I admire Fauci both for valuing evidence and truth, the upstream constraints on responsible public pronouncements, but he was also attuned to the downstream effects of his pronouncements, and it's to his credit that he was at least trying to take account of those as well. He was in a very difficult spot. Maybe, arguably, he did the best he could, and maybe we should forgive him for it, while also recognizing that in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to make such compromises.
He paid a price for that, though. I mean, I know people who would otherwise be much more sympathetic to what he says generally, but are very aware of that.
I mean, that's a fine point, and it reminds us that you can squander your credibility by trying to produce a short-term outcome like getting the PPE to healthcare workers. You can squander credibility and end up regretting that. So making these decisions, often you have to think about second and third order effects, which can make it really hard.
Most of our life, though, we struggle with what we want versus what is. Contemporary technology has enabled us to claim that what we want is.
I think that's a fine point. Well,
we have a lot of these fallacies out there that are just absolutely stupid, irrational, but they collect people because that's what some people want, and they actually claim then that it is.
Well, and we're young people today are growing up in a world where they can spend the bulk of their free time in these fantasy online gaming worlds, right? Yeah. trigger all the pleasure centers of the brain in various ways, and you can get highly addicted. I've got a son who's highly addicted to online gaming. And think about just how many advertisements you've seen on TV for an app or a service from an insurance company. So it's an ad for insurance, and the person in the ad picks up their cell phone and taps it once, and a big smile spreads across their face. Here, you want happiness? You want to have something to smile? Download our app, sign up for our insurance company. It makes it look as though all you need to do to satisfy every want you have, it makes it look as though our wants are that close at hand. And sometimes they are, but often, of course, they're not. Perhaps this is the right time for me to thank you all for your time and attention. I wish you really well, and hope we'll cross paths in person when this is all.
Yeah, absolutely.